The most dangerous prison is the one you can't see, because you built it yourself, one unchallenged thought at a time. Before you read one more word, stop. Right now. Just stop. Whatever you were thinking about 30 seconds ago, your bills, your boss, your ex, your weekend plans, notice how quickly your mind pulled you somewhere else the moment you started reading. That's not focus. That's a hijacked brain. And here's the terrifying part. It has been running on autopilot your entire life. What if every failure you've ever experienced, every relationship that fell apart, every goal you abandoned halfway through, what if none of it was really your fault? Not in the way you think. Not because life was unfair. Not because you weren't talented enough. Not because the timing was wrong. What if the real culprit was a set of invisible mental programs installed in your mind before you were old enough to question them? And what if, starting today, you could rewrite every single one of them? This isn't a motivational book. Motivation fades by Tuesday. This is a manual for rewiring the operating system inside your skull. Every chapter you're about to read is a tool, not a concept, not an idea. A weapon-grade tool for taking back control of the most powerful asset you will ever own, your own mind. By the time you finish this book, you'll understand why the most successful people in America, the ones who seem to operate on a different frequency, aren't smarter than you. They haven't been luckier than you. They've simply learned to run their minds instead of letting their minds run them. Let's begin. The mental prison system. Here's something nobody in school, church, or your family dinner table ever told you. There's a very good chance you've been living inside a cage you can't see, made of bars you can't touch, guarded by a jailer who wears your face. And the worst part? You've been defending that cage. You've been decorating it. You've been telling people it's actually pretty comfortable in here. Think about the last time you had a genuinely new thought. Not a recycled worry. Not a replay of something that happened in 2019. Not a rehearsal of an argument you never actually had. When was the last time your mind moved somewhere completely fresh? For most Americans living in the frantic rhythm of modern life, alarm at 6, phone check before your feet hit the floor, traffic, deadlines, doom scrolling at midnight, the mind becomes less like a sharp instrument and more like a hamster wheel. Fast, exhausting, going absolutely nowhere. This is not an accident. It's architecture. Mental architecture built brick by brick from the moment you entered the world. Here's how it works. From the day you were born, your brain was doing one thing above everything else: learning the rules. Every experience you had as a child got filed away as a belief. Your parents' arguments about money became your belief about financial security. The teacher who laughed when you gave the wrong answer became your belief about public failure. The friend group that rejected you in 7th grade became your belief about belonging. By the time you hit age 7 years old, the majority of your core beliefs about yourself, other people, and what's possible in this world were already locked into place. And here's the brutal truth. You didn't choose a single one of them. You were a child. You accepted the world as it was presented to you. You had no filter, no critical thinking, no way to say, "Actually, I'd like to reject this particular piece of programming. Thank you very much." Your brain was wide open, downloading everything in sight. Now you're an adult, and those 7-year-old conclusions are still running the show. The mental prison has 4 walls, and you need to know each one by name. The first wall is victimhood thinking. This is the belief that what happens to you determines how you feel and what you can do. Someone cuts you off in traffic on the 405, and suddenly your whole morning is ruined. Your boss sends a cold email, and you spend 3 hours catastrophizing about whether you're about to get fired. The moment you believe that your inner world is controlled by outer events, you hand your power to the chaos of the world, and the world is always chaotic. The second wall is limitation programming. Somewhere along the way, someone told you to be realistic. Maybe it was a well-meaning parent. Maybe it was a guidance counselor. Maybe it was just the collective cultural message that success is for other people. People with connections, with degrees from the right schools, with the right last name. Every time you've ever said, "I'm just not the type of person who," you were reading from a script someone else wrote. You were reinforcing a wall that you didn't build, but have maintained faithfully ever since. The third wall is the comparison trap. Social media didn't create this one, but it gave it steroids. The human brain was not designed to process the highlight reels of 3 billion people simultaneously. Yet, that's exactly what we ask it to do every morning before breakfast. You scroll through carefully curated images of people's vacations, promotions, relationships, and bodies, and your ancient biological comparison machine starts running the numbers. And the numbers never add up in your favor, because you're comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. This isn't vanity, it's prison. The fourth wall is emotional reactivity. Most people believe that emotions just happen to them. That anger is something that appears when someone does something infuriating. That anxiety is what the world generates when things get uncertain. That sadness is the natural response to loss. But this belief that you're a passenger in your own emotional life is perhaps the most disempowering idea a human being can hold. It turns you into a weather vane, spinning in whatever direction the latest wind decides to blow. Now, here's what the prison system doesn't want you to figure out. The door is already open. It has always been open. The key is called conscious awareness, and it's been sitting in your pocket this whole time. The instant you recognize that your thoughts are not facts, that your emotions are not commands, and that your beliefs are not permanent truths, the walls begin to shake. Not because they were never real. They were real. They shaped your life. But they only hold power as long as you remain unaware of them. You are not your thoughts. You are the one having the thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the one experiencing the emotions. You are not your beliefs. You are the one who gets to decide whether to keep believing them. That distinction, that single world-splitting distinction, is where every transformation begins. The prison walls don't shatter dramatically. They don't crumble all at once in some cinematic moment of awakening. They dissolve, slowly, deliberately, permanently, one conscious choice at a time, and that process starts right now. The awareness revolution. There's a particular kind of suffering that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up as a dramatic crisis or a clear breaking point. It's the low-grade static of a life lived on autopilot. The faint but constant sense that you're watching your own life from slightly behind your own eyes, reacting to everything, directing nothing. Most people have spent decades in that state without ever having a name for it. The name is unconsciousness, not the medical kind, the experiential kind, living inside your head without ever actually examining what's going on in there. Here's a simple test. Close your eyes for 10 seconds and try to not think about anything, not one thought. Go ahead, try it. Impossible, right? The mind just keeps generating content, commentary, memories, worries, random lyrics from a song you haven't heard since 2014. The mind does not stop. It cannot stop. That is its nature. But here's what most people never realize. Just because the mind produces a thought doesn't mean you have to believe it, follow it, or act on it. The thoughts are weather. You are the sky. The weather moves through. The sky remains. The awareness revolution begins when you stop being swept away by every passing mental storm and start observing them from a steady vantage point. This is not meditation in the incense and lotus position sense, though meditation can help. This is something more fundamental. This is developing the ability to be a witness to your own mental activity, to stand slightly apart from your thoughts and watch them the way a scientist watches an experiment, with curiosity, not judgment, with interest, not identification. There are 3 levels to this awareness, and each one unlocks a different dimension of freedom. Level 1. Cognitive awareness. This is becoming conscious of your thought patterns. Most people have never done a genuine inventory of the quality of their daily thinking. Are your habitual thoughts mostly about problems or possibilities? Are they anchored in the past, nervously hovering in the future, or actually present? Do they expand your sense of what's possible, or do they repeatedly rehearse your limitations? The average person has somewhere between 50 and 70,000 thoughts per day. Research suggests that for most people, the vast majority of those thoughts are negative, repetitive, and completely disconnected from what's actually happening right now. The same worries on a loop, the same resentments revisited, the same self-critical script playing on repeat like a broken record nobody thought to replace. That voice in your head, the one narrating your life, judging your choices, predicting your failures, is not you. It is a mental habit, a deeply ingrained pattern of cognition that was shaped by your past, but does not have to define your future. It can be observed, questioned, ultimately redirected. Level 2. Emotional awareness. Emotions are not your enemies. They're data. They carry information about your internal state, your needs, your values, and your environment. The problem is that most people receive that data as if it were a command. Feel fear leads to retreat. Feel anger leads to attack. Feel shame leads to hide. This stimulus-response chain running on autopilot is what creates emotional chaos. Emotional awareness means catching the emotion before it triggers automatic behavior. It means noticing where the feeling lives in your body, the tightness in your chest when you're anxious, the heat in your face when you're embarrassed, the heaviness in your limbs when you're sad, and using those physical signals as early warning systems rather than emergency alarms. When you can name what you're feeling precisely and identify what triggered it, you've already created distance from it. And distance from an emotion is the birthplace of choice. Level 3. Behavioral awareness. Your behaviors are the external proof of your internal programming, not what you intend to do, not what you tell yourself you value, what you actually do consistently, day after day when no one is watching and your willpower is low and the path of least resistance is wide open in front of you. Look at your patterns. What do you reach for when you're stressed? What do you avoid when you're afraid? What behaviors do you repeat despite knowing they don't serve you? These are not character flaws. They are program responses, and like all programs, they can be rewritten. The power of awareness isn't that it solves anything by itself. It doesn't. You can be brilliantly aware of a bad habit and still perform it. But awareness creates space. Between stimulus and response, there is a gap. In most people's lives, that gap is the width of a hair. In an awakened mind, that gap becomes wide enough to drive through. In that gap lives your freedom. Not theoretical freedom. Not freedom in principle. Real, operational, practical freedom to choose how you think, how you feel, and how you act. In real time, under real pressure, in the actual circumstances of your actual life. This is the revolution. It's quiet, it's personal, and it changes everything. The architecture of thought picture. The most sophisticated city you've ever seen, New York at night maybe, or downtown Chicago from the river, the grid of light stretching to every horizon. Now imagine that every light in every building represents a thought. Some buildings are lit up brilliantly, drawing all the attention. Others are nearly dark. Most people never get to decide which buildings stay lit. The city just runs itself. The architecture of thought is about becoming the urban planner of your own mind, not accepting the city as it inherited itself to you, but consciously designing it for the life you actually want to build. First, understand what thoughts actually are. They're not mystical. They're not divine messages. They're electrochemical signals racing across neural networks, patterns of activity shaped by your genetics, your experiences, and the environment you've lived in. They arise automatically, peak briefly, and fade. The problem is that most people treat thoughts the way a hoarder treats junk mail. Everything gets kept, nothing gets sorted, and the accumulation eventually makes the whole space unlivable. Your mind generates thoughts constantly. You cannot control which thoughts arise, but you have complete authority over which thoughts you develop. Which ones you turn over, examine, invest emotional energy in, build upon, and ultimately act from. This is the first principle, selective attention. Your attention is like the most powerful spotlight in the world. Whatever you point it at grows vivid, detailed, and real. Whatever you turn away from fades into background noise. Most people point their spotlight at problems, worries, past failures, and imagined disasters, and then wonder why their emotional experience feels so relentlessly grim. Mental masters are deliberate about where they aim that spotlight. Not dishonestly, not pretending problems don't exist, but strategically understanding that dwelling on a problem without moving toward a solution is just suffering with extra steps. The second principle is thought replacement. Here's something counterintuitive that neuroscience has confirmed. You cannot eliminate a thought by trying not to think it. The classic example, don't think about a white bear, makes you think about nothing but a white bear. Suppression doesn't work, but substitution does. When you notice your mind running down a familiar groove of anxiety or self-doubt, you don't fight the thought. You replace it, not with a hollow affirmation, but with a genuinely compelling alternative, a thought that is both believable and energizing. I'm terrible at this gets replaced not with, I'm amazing at this. Your brain won't buy that. But with something like, I'm in the process of getting better at this and I have evidence. The key is building your replacement library before you need it. Don't wait until anxiety is already flooding your system to go searching for better thoughts. Prepare them in advance, the way a pilot learns emergency procedures when the sky is calm. The third principle is thought amplification. Not all thoughts deserve equal real estate in your mind. The thought, I wonder if I could actually pull this off, and the thought, I'll probably mess this up like everything else, are not equivalent thoughts, deserving equivalent attention. One of them moves you toward a life you want. One of them keeps you in the cage. Amplification means deliberately feeding your most empowering thoughts, more attention, more emotional energy, more imaginative detail. When you catch yourself thinking about a possibility you're excited by, you don't just note it and scroll on. You pause. You explore it. You feel into it. You let that single spark of inspiration become a sustained flame. The fourth principle is thought programming. Understanding that whatever you consistently think becomes, over time, the operating system of your mind. Your habitual thoughts shape what you notice, how you interpret events, and what actions feel natural or unthinkable to you. This is why the most consistently successful people in any field, elite athletes, top executives, world-class artists, don't just think positively occasionally. They have systematic mental practices that keep their thought patterns aligned with their highest goals. Morning routines, visualization practices, journaling, specific self-talk patterns. These aren't self-help gimmicks. They're maintenance protocols for a high-performance mental system. The fifth principle is quality control, developing standards for which thoughts earn your sustained attention. Just as you wouldn't eat every piece of food placed in front of you regardless of whether it was nourishing or poisonous, you shouldn't automatically consume every thought your mind produces. Ask of any thought, is this true? Is this useful? Does this move me toward what I actually want? If the answer is no to all three, you don't fight the thought. You don't judge yourself for having it. You simply choose not to feed it. You let it arise and pass, like a cloud moving through that unchanging sky. Your thoughts are not your destiny, but your habitual thoughts, the ones you return to again and again, the ones you fed with years of attention and emotional energy. Those shape everything. The moment you begin to consciously architect that landscape, you stop being someone who inherited a mind and start being someone who is actively building one. Emotional sovereignty. Let's talk about the thing nobody taught you in school, in most therapy offices, or at the kitchen table growing up. How emotions actually work, not what they feel like, how they actually function. Because the gap between how most people think emotions work and how they actually work is costing people their relationships, their health, their careers, and, in extreme cases, their lives. Here's the standard story most people believe. Something happens in the world, and that event causes an emotion. The traffic jam causes your frustration. Your partner's comment causes your hurt. The rejection email causes your shame. The event is the input. The emotion is the output. You're just the processing machine in the middle, helplessly converting stimuli into feelings. But that story is wrong, and the wrongness of it is not a small error. It's the difference between spending your life as a passenger in your emotional experience or becoming the driver. Here's what actually happens. Something occurs in the external world. Your mind instantaneously interprets that event through all your accumulated beliefs, memories, and expectations. And then your nervous system generates an emotional response, not to the event, but to your interpretation of the event. Two people get the same rejection email. One person interprets it as evidence that they're fundamentally unworthy and should stop trying. The other interprets it as a data point, useful feedback, one step closer to a yes. The email is identical. The interpretations are opposite. The emotional experiences are completely different. Your emotions are the output of your thinking, not the direct product of your circumstances. Change the thinking, and you change the feeling, not by faking it, not by white-knuckling your way to false positivity, but by genuinely developing the ability to see events more accurately, which for most people means seeing them less catastrophically. Emotional sovereignty is the practice of owning your emotional life rather than being owned by it. It does not mean you stop feeling things. It does not mean you become some emotionless machine, processing life's events with robotic detachment. If anything, emotional sovereignty allows you to feel more richly, more cleanly, more completely, because you're no longer in a constant state of resistance to your own inner experience. Here's the first tool, the pause practice. Between any trigger and any response, there is a gap. For most emotionally reactive people, that gap is essentially zero. They're triggered, and they respond before they've even registered what happened. The pause practice is simply this. When you feel a strong emotion beginning to rise, you create an intentional delay. You breathe. You create space. You ask, what am I interpreting here? Is that interpretation the only possible one? The most useful one? This doesn't take long. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Enough to shift from reactive mode to responsive mode. The difference between reacting and responding is the difference between a life that happens to you and a life you consciously participate in creating. The second tool is emotional vocabulary expansion. Research by neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett suggests that people who have a larger and more precise emotional vocabulary actually experience emotions differently. They can differentiate between states that less verbally sophisticated people experience as an undifferentiated flood. If you only have bad, good, and upset in your emotional dictionary, your brain has very limited tools for processing your inner experience. But if you can distinguish between frustration and disappointment, between envy and admiration, between anxiety and excitement, you gain surgical precision in understanding your own responses. The third tool is somatic awareness, learning to read your body's emotional signals before they escalate to the point of hijacking your behavior. Anxiety lives somewhere. For many people, it's in the chest, a tightening, a compressed feeling, as if the rib cage is shrinking. Anger often shows up in the jaw, the shoulders, the fists. Sadness can feel like a weight pressing down from above. These physical sensations are your early warning system. When you learn to notice the first whispers of an emotional response in your body before it reaches full volume, you have far more time and capacity to choose how to respond to it. The fourth tool is emotion as information processing. Every significant emotion you experience is trying to tell you something. Anxiety is signaling that something important to you feels threatened or uncertain. Anger is signaling that a value or boundary has been violated. Sadness is signaling a loss that matters to you. Guilt is signaling a conflict between your actions and your values. Shame is signaling a threat to your sense of belonging. When you stop experiencing emotions as obstacles and start experiencing them as information, everything changes. You stop trying to get rid of feelings and start trying to understand them. And understanding them, really understanding them, almost always reveals a choice you can make that serves you better than blind reaction. The ultimate territory of emotional sovereignty is what I call anti-fragile emotion. The ability to not just survive difficult emotions, but to actively use them as fuel. Anxiety becomes drive. Frustration becomes focus. Fear becomes information about what matters enough to be worth doing anyway. At this level, nothing the emotional world throws at you is purely a threat. Everything becomes resource. The reprogramming protocol. Every story you believe about yourself is recorded somewhere, not in a file you can access on demand, not in a conscious archive you can browse through, but embedded in the automatic responses. The gut reactions, the instant judgments that fire up before your conscious mind has even fully woken up. This is your mental software, and for most people, it's running code that was written by a child in a world that no longer exists. The reprogramming protocol is not a weekend workshop. It's not a meditation retreat or a 3-minute morning routine. It's a systematic, ongoing process of identifying what programs are running, understanding where they came from, questioning whether they still serve you, and deliberately installing new ones. Let's start with the audit. Step 1. The mental inventory. Look at your life with the dispassion of a management consultant who has been called in to analyze why a company keeps producing the same suboptimal results. Where are the recurring patterns? What situations consistently produce the same frustrating outcomes for you? Where do you find yourself, again and again, making the same kinds of choices and arriving at the same kinds of destinations? Your external patterns are the fingerprints of your internal programming. Consistent financial struggle. There's programming at work, beliefs about money, deserving, safety, risk, relationships that start with electricity and end in disconnection. There's programming at work, beliefs about intimacy, trust, your own worthiness of lasting love, a career that keeps stalling right before significant advancement. There's programming at work, beliefs about success, visibility, what happens to people who reach for too much. The outer world is always showing you what the inner world believes. Step 2. Archaeological investigation. Once you've identified a pattern, trace it back. Not with blame, not with self-victimization, but with genuine curiosity. Where did this belief originate? What was the first experience that taught you this particular lesson about yourself or the world? Common sources. A parent who handled financial stress by catastrophizing, teaching you that money is always on the verge of running out. A teacher who publicly humiliated you for a wrong answer, teaching you that visible failure is dangerous. A childhood peer group that rejected you for being different, teaching you that authenticity is a liability. An early romantic relationship that ended in betrayal, teaching you that emotional openness is weaponized against you. None of this is about blame. Your parents were running their own programming. Your teachers were doing their best with the tools they had. The world was not conspiring to damage you. But damage happens nonetheless, not maliciously, but through the inevitable friction of being a sensitive, impressionable human child in an imperfect world. Step 3. The cross-examination. Now you interrogate the belief with the rigor of a skilled attorney who suspects a witness is lying. Ask, is this belief actually true? Not emotionally true, not it feels true, but demonstrably, evidentially, factually true. Usually the answer is no, or at least not entirely, not anymore, not in the way the belief has been framing things. I always fail when things really matters. Is that actually true? Every single time, with every type of challenge? Or is that the memory of a few significant failures, amplified by emotional intensity and repetition, while the many successes have been quietly discounted? People can't be trusted? Every person? In every context? Or have there been people who proved trustworthy, whose trustworthiness you somehow processed as the exception rather than the rule? Cross-examination doesn't destroy limiting beliefs by itself, but it loosens them. It creates cracks in what felt like solid concrete, and through those cracks, new possibilities can begin to grow. Step 4. New program design. This is where most people make a critical error. They try to eliminate the limiting belief without replacing it with something functional. That's like formatting a hard drive without installing a new operating system. The machine just doesn't work. Design new beliefs that are believable, close enough to your current reality that your mind doesn't immediately reject them. Empowering, they expand your sense of what's possible and what you're capable of. Specific, vague beliefs produce vague results. Actionable, they should naturally generate behaviors that move you forward. And emotionally resonant, they should create some feeling of aliveness, possibility, or motivation when you hold them. The new belief doesn't have to be the opposite of the old one. It just has to be better. I always fail when things matter might become, failure is information, and I have a track record of learning from it and adapting. That's not blindly positive. It's genuinely more accurate and vastly more functional. Step 5. Installation through experience. This is where the real work happens. Beliefs don't change through thinking alone. They change through the accumulation of new experiences that contradict the old story. Mental rehearsal. Vivid, detailed visualization of yourself operating from the new belief begins to create new neural pathways. Affirmation with genuine emotional engagement, not rote repetition, but actual felt conviction, reinforces those pathways. But most critically, behavioral alignment, acting in ways consistent with the new belief, even before you fully feel it, even when the old programming is screaming at you to retreat to familiar territory. Every time you choose the new behavior over the old reflex, you're casting a vote for your new identity. One vote doesn't win an election, but votes accumulate, and eventually what felt like swimming upstream becomes your natural current. The focus weapon. We are living through the greatest attention heist in human history. Right now, in the servers of every major social media platform, in the algorithms driving every streaming service and newsfeed, in the engineering decisions made by some of the most brilliant minds on Earth. There is an ongoing trillion-dollar effort to capture your attention and never let it go. Not because they want to entertain you, because your attention is the product being sold to advertisers. You are not the customer. You are what's being sold. The average American now checks their phone 96 times per day. That's once every 10 minutes of waking life. The average continuous focus time before distraction has collapsed to somewhere around 47 seconds. 47 seconds of uninterrupted thought before something, an impulse, a notification, an ambient anxiety pulls the mind elsewhere. In this environment, the ability to focus deeply is not just a productivity hack. It is a superpower. It is increasingly rare, increasingly valuable, and, unlike the engineered addictions fighting for your attention, entirely learnable. Focus, properly understood, is not a single thing. It's a system of interrelated mental capacities. There is selective attention, the ability to choose what to engage with out of everything competing for your awareness. There is sustained attention, the ability to maintain that engagement over time without being dislodged. There is executive attention, the higher order capacity to monitor and adjust your focus based on what's actually most important. Most people have never deliberately trained any of these. They simply navigate the attention economy on default settings. And those default settings were designed by people who profit from your distraction. The first principle of focus mastery: intentional direction. Every moment of your waking life, your attention is pointed somewhere. The only question is whether you are choosing where it points or whether circumstances, algorithms, and unconscious habits are choosing for you. The first step toward focus mastery is the simple, not easy, simple practice of asking yourself several times throughout the day, is this where I'm choosing to have my attention right now? Most of the time, the honest answer will be no. That moment of recognition is not failure. It's the beginning of recalibration. The second principle: environmental architecture. Your ability to focus is not purely a function of willpower or discipline. It is enormously influenced by your surroundings. An environment full of visual clutter, ambient noise, easy access to distraction, and random social interruptions will undermine even the most determined focused effort. An environment specifically designed for concentration will make focus almost effortless. This is not a comfortable truth for people who like to believe that their character should be enough to overcome any circumstance. But science has consistently shown that environmental design outperforms willpower. Make the right action. the path of least resistance, and you'll take the right action far more consistently than you will through sheer force of will. Remove your phone from the room where you do your most important work. Use a single tab or a distraction-blocking application. Communicate clear boundaries around interruption-free time. These are not extreme measures. They are basic hygiene for a mind trying to operate at capacity in an environment specifically engineered to prevent that. The third principle, the depth training practice. Your focus capacity is a muscle. Like any muscle, it grows stronger through progressive, consistent training. Most people's focus muscles have been atrophying for years under the influence of constant context-switching, bite-sized content, and the dopamine drip of endless novelty. Rebuilding that capacity requires the same approach as rebuilding physical fitness. Start where you are. Progress gradually. Be consistent. Begin with 25 minutes of completely uninterrupted, single-task, focused work. Not multitasking, not glancing at email. Just for a second. One task. Completely. For 25 minutes. This is harder than it sounds. Your brain will generate urgent reasons to check things, to get up, to do something, anything. That feels easier. Sit with that discomfort. That restlessness is the sensation of a muscle being challenged. It's the signal that growth is happening. Over weeks and months, extend the duration. 45 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours. Elite performers in fields from chess to surgery to software engineering regularly maintain focus for sessions of that length. They are not superhumans. They trained a muscle that you can train too. The fourth principle, flow state architecture. There is a mental state that every high performer knows by feel, even when they can't always name it. Flow. The state of complete absorption where time disappears, self-consciousness evaporates, and the quality of work peaks. Athletes call it the zone. Musicians call it being in the pocket. Coders call it deep work. Flow is not random. It has specific conditions that can be deliberately engineered. The challenge must be slightly above your current skill level, enough to require your full engagement, but not so far above it that anxiety shuts down creative processing. You need a clear, specific goal for the session, and you need freedom from interruption for long enough that your brain can make the transition from surface engagement to genuine depth. Create those conditions consistently, and flow becomes a repeatable state rather than a lucky accident. The fifth principle, strategic recovery. Focus is not an infinite resource. Demanding sustained deep focus without recovery is as strategically unsound as demanding sustained maximum physical exertion without rest. You will degrade. Performance will decline. And crucially, the quality of recovered focus vastly exceeds the quality of exhausted focus that's been pushed past its limit. Build deliberate recovery into your focus practice. Short breaks that are genuinely restorative, not doom scrolling, which fragments attention further, but actual recovery. A brief walk outside, a few minutes of stillness, movement, or music that genuinely relaxes the mind. The goal is to protect the integrity of your peak focus periods, and that requires treating recovery as seriously as you treat the work itself. The person who can focus deeply in a world engineered for shallow attention will be the person who produces the most meaningful work, solves the hardest problems, and creates the most lasting impact. The attention war is real. Choose to win it. Memory architecture. Most people believe one of two things about memory. Either they have a good memory and treat it as a fixed inherited gift they did nothing to earn, or they have a bad memory and treat it as a permanent, unavoidable limitation they're powerless to change. Both beliefs are wrong in the same fundamental way. They treat memory as a trait rather than a skill. Memory is one of the most trainable cognitive capacities available to human beings. The extraordinary memories of competitive memorizers, master chess players, and experienced physicians who can recall thousands of clinical cases are not the result of genetic lottery. They are the product of specific techniques applied consistently over time. And while you may not have any interest in memorizing the order of a shuffled deck of cards in under 2 minutes, the same principles that enable that feat will transform your ability to learn, retain, and apply everything that matters to you. Principle 1. Attention during encoding. The most common memory problem is not actually a retrieval problem. It's an encoding problem. You can't remember something you never fully registered in the first place. You forgot your colleague's name at the meeting because you were already thinking about your next talking point when they were introduced. You forgot what the book said because you were scanning words while your mind was elsewhere. Memory begins with genuine, present-moment attention. When you want to remember something, really commit to remembering it, you bring your full attention to that moment of learning. You eliminate distractions. You engage actively with the material. You ask questions about it. You notice specific details. The stronger your initial engagement, the stronger the memory trace. Principle 2. The connection web. Your brain is not a filing cabinet. It's a web of association, constantly linking new information to existing knowledge through similarity, contrast, causation, and context. Isolated facts have no connection hooks. They float freely and drift away. Information embedded in a rich web of associations holds fast. When you encounter something new that you want to remember, don't just try to store it. Connect it. How does this relate to something you already know? What does it remind you of? Where does it fit into your existing understanding? What's surprising or counterintuitive about it? Because surprise is itself a powerful memory anchor, since novelty triggers the brain's attention systems. The more connecting you do at the moment of learning, the more routes your brain has to find that information later. Principle 3. Spaced repetition. Here's one of the most reliably established findings in all of cognitive science. Reviewing information at strategic intervals is vastly more efficient than reviewing it in large, concentrated blocks. The spacing effect shows that the same total time spent reviewing produces dramatically better long-term retention when that time is distributed across multiple sessions, separated by increasing gaps. Review new information after 1 day. Review it again 3 days later, again after a week, again after 2 weeks. Each review strengthens the memory trace and extends the interval before the next review is needed. Eventually, the information transitions from fragile short-term storage to robust long-term memory. This is not theory. It has been replicated so consistently that it forms the backbone of the most effective language learning systems and medical education programs in the world. Principle 4. Active recall. Most students and adult learners default to rereading as their primary review strategy. Research shows this is one of the least effective things you can do for memory. Rereading creates the illusion of learning. The content feels familiar, which your brain misinterprets as having learned it, while actually producing minimal memory consolidation. Active recall, testing yourself, attempting to retrieve information without looking at it, is dramatically more effective. The act of retrieval itself strengthens the memory in a way that passive review cannot. And crucially, it reveals the gap between what you think you know and what you actually know, allowing you to target your study time where it's genuinely needed. Use flashcards. Quiz yourself. Try to recall the key ideas of a chapter from memory before reviewing your notes. Explain concepts out loud as if teaching someone else. These effortful retrieval practices are more difficult than passive review, and that difficulty is precisely what makes them work. Principle 5. The Memory Palace. This technique, known formally as the method of Loci, has been used by orators, philosophers, and competitive memorizers for over 2,000 years. It works because it leverages one of the most powerful memory systems your brain already has: spatial memory. Humans evolved in environments where remembering the spatial layout of territory was a survival advantage. As a result, your ability to remember locations and navigate space is far more robust and detailed than your ability to remember abstract information. The memory palace technique exploits this by giving abstract information a physical location. Choose a space you know intimately: your apartment, the route from your front door to the nearest coffee shop, the layout of your office building. Assign specific, vivid, unusual images to specific locations along a mental path through that space. When you want to recall the information, you take a mental walk through that familiar space and see the images you placed there. The strangeness and vividness of the images matters. Your brain is designed to remember things that are striking, emotionally charged, or unusual. The more bizarre the image, the more reliably it anchors the information in memory. This is not a trick. It's an application of how your memory actually works. Decision mastery. Every morning in America, millions of people wake up and immediately begin making decisions: what to drink, what to wear, whether to check email before or after the shower, what route to take, how to respond to the overnight messages that have accumulated. And these are just the decisions in the first 40 minutes. By the time you reach genuinely important decision territory, career moves, relationship commitments, financial choices, health trade-offs, your decision-making system is already bearing significant load. Research on decision fatigue suggests that the quality of human decisions reliably deteriorates the more decisions we've already made in a given period. Judges are more lenient at the start of the day. Doctors order more tests later in their shifts. You reach for the convenient, low-effort food option because your decision-making capacity has been depleted by 100 smaller choices. This is not weakness. It's biology, and understanding it is the first step toward working with it rather than against it. Decision mastery is not about making perfect decisions. Perfect decisions are a fiction. The future is uncertain. Information is always incomplete, and every choice involves trade-offs that can't be fully known in advance. Decision mastery is about building reliable processes that consistently produce better outcomes than intuition, emotion, or default behavior would produce on their own. The foundation. Values. Clarity. You cannot navigate well without knowing where you're trying to go. Most people operate from a vague, implicit set of values they've never explicitly examined, and those unexamined values often conflict with each other in ways that produce chronic indecision and regret. What actually matters to you? Not what should matter, not what sounds good, not what you were told to value. What do you actually care about? Demonstrated by how you spend your time, money, and energy when no one is watching and no one is grading you. Getting clear on your genuine values creates a decision filter. When you're facing a difficult choice, you ask, which of these options is most aligned with what I've determined actually matters to me? The choice often becomes far clearer than it seemed. The option expansion practice. Most people enter decision situations with exactly two options already loaded: the obvious thing to do and the opposite of the obvious thing. The actual solution space is almost always larger and often contains alternatives that are far better than either of the default options. Practice deliberate option expansion. When facing a significant decision, force yourself to generate at least 5 distinct approaches before evaluating any of them. Ask, What would I do if money weren't a constraint? What would I do if failure were guaranteed but painless? What would someone I deeply admire do in this situation? What creative combination or hybrid approach might exist? What's the wildly unconventional option? This exercise consistently surfaces possibilities that the default two-option framework would never produce. Reversibility calibration. One of the most valuable distinctions in decision-making is between reversible and irreversible decisions. Jeff Bezos has called these two-way doors and one-way doors. Reversible decisions, ones where you can course correct if the outcome isn't what you hoped, deserve relatively quick action. The cost of moving fast on a reversible decision is low. The cost of excessive deliberation is high. Irreversible decisions, ones that close off future options permanently or semi-permanently, deserve more careful, slower, more thorough analysis. Most people apply the same level of deliberation to both categories, which means they agonize over small reversible choices and rush into consequential irreversible ones. Calibrating your decision-making energy to the actual stakes and reversibility of the choice is one of the highest leverage improvements you can make. The temporal expansion test. Strong emotions compress time. When you're angry, anxious, excited, or in pain, the present moment expands to fill your entire field of awareness, and the future becomes abstract and distant. This is why decisions made in emotional intensity so frequently look different in retrospect. The temporal expansion test is simple. Before making any significant decision, ask how you'll feel about it in 1 year, in 5 years, in 20 years. This forced perspective shift doesn't eliminate emotion from the decision. Emotion carries valuable information and shouldn't be excluded, but it counterbalances the distorting effect of present emotional intensity with a longer-term view. The decision you'll be proud of in 20 years is usually discernible, even when it's not the decision that feels most immediately comfortable. The cognitive bias inventory. Human decision-making is systematically influenced by dozens of well-documented cognitive biases, reliable patterns of distortion that affect virtually everyone without awareness. Confirmation bias makes you weight evidence that supports what you already believe more heavily than evidence that contradicts it. Sunk cost bias makes you continue investments that aren't working because of what you've already spent. Availability bias makes you overweight vivid, recent, or emotionally charged examples. Anchoring bias makes you disproportionately influenced by the first number or option you encounter. Knowing these biases doesn't immunize you from them, but it gives you the capacity to notice when they might be operating and deliberately counteract them. The simple practice of asking what bias might be influencing this decision before finalizing any significant choice is enough to meaningfully improve outcomes over time. Mental resilience. Engineering. There's a conversation that happens in the mind of every person who has ever been knocked flat by something they didn't see coming. It goes something like this. Maybe I wasn't built for this. Maybe this is a sign. Maybe the people who said I was reaching too far were right. In the moment, this conversation feels like clear-eyed realism. It feels like wisdom finally cutting through the delusion of ambition. But it's not wisdom. It's your nervous system doing what it was evolutionarily designed to do, conserving resources in the face of perceived threat by convincing you to stop trying. Resilience is not about being the person who doesn't feel devastated by hard things. Resilient people feel the devastation fully. The difference is what they do next, and what they do next is largely a function of how they've trained their minds in the calmer periods before the storm arrived. Mental resilience engineering is a proactive practice. You don't build it in the crisis. You build it between crises. so that when the inevitable difficulty arrives, and it always arrives, you have infrastructure in place. The cognitive flexibility imperative. Rigid thinking is the enemy of resilience. When your plan fails and you have only one plan, you fail. When your understanding of a situation is fixed and reality contradicts it, you shatter rather than bend. Cognitive flexibility, the ability to generate multiple interpretations, multiple approaches, multiple possible meanings for any given event, is the psychological equivalent of being made of bamboo rather than glass. Develop the habit of generating alternative interpretations for every challenge. Not optimistic spin. Genuine alternatives. This setback means I should quit becomes one interpretation among several. This setback is revealing a gap I needed to find. This setback is redirecting me towards something better. This setback is developing exactly the capacity I'll need for the next level. You're not required to believe any of these alternatives uncritically. You're required to hold them as possible alongside the catastrophic interpretation, because possibility is where solutions live. The meaning-making engine. Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps and spent the rest of his long life making a single essential point. We cannot always choose our circumstances, but we can almost always choose the meaning we make of them. This is not spiritual bypassing. It's not pretending that bad things aren't bad. It's recognizing that the meaning you assign to a difficulty is itself a choice. And that choice has enormous consequences for whether the difficulty destroys you or strengthens you. Resilient people consistently ask, what is this experience trying to teach me? Not as a platitude, as a genuine investigative question. What skill is this developing? What false belief is this exposing? What unnecessary thing is this stripping away? What direction might this be redirecting me toward? When you treat adversity as information rather than evidence of your inadequacy, it changes everything. Not immediately, not without pain, but fundamentally. The physical foundation. There is no psychological resilience without physical foundation. The body and mind are not separate systems that occasionally interact. They are a single integrated system, and the state of one profoundly affects the capacity of the other. Sleep deprivation reduces emotional regulation to catastrophic levels. Chronic physical stress floods the body with cortisol that directly impairs memory, decision-making, and emotional processing. Sedentary behavior is strongly correlated with depression and anxiety. Nutritional deficiency compromises neurotransmitter production in ways that directly affect mood, motivation, and cognitive performance. This is not a lecture about lifestyle. It's a recognition that your mental resilience has a physical substrate, and ignoring that substrate while trying to build psychological strength is like trying to strengthen a building by working only on the upper floors while leaving the foundation eroding. The anti-fragility goal. Nassim Taleb introduced the concept of anti-fragility to describe systems that don't merely withstand stress, but actually improve because of it. The human immune system is anti-fragile. Expose it to pathogens and it becomes stronger. Muscles are anti-fragile. Expose them to stress and they rebuild stronger than before. The mind can be anti-fragile too, but it requires deliberate cultivation. Each time you move through a difficulty rather than around it, each time you allow the discomfort of challenge to fully register rather than anesthetizing it, each time you find a way to extract something useful from a genuinely painful experience, you are building a mind that will not just survive future hardship, but will be demonstrably stronger for having endured it. The goal is not a life without difficulty. The goal is a mind that transforms difficulty into fuel. The habit. Installation system. Your life is not primarily the product of your ambitions, your values, or your intentions. It is the product of your habits. The automatic, nearly effortless behaviors that you perform day after day, largely without conscious decision, that accumulate through the invisible miracle of compounding into who you are, what you've built, and the shape your life takes. This is simultaneously the most terrifying and the most empowering truth about human behavior. Terrifying because it means you are not primarily navigating your life consciously. Empowering because it means that the person you become tomorrow is largely engineered by the systems you install today. Most people try to change through willpower. They decide, with great conviction and sincere motivation, that they're going to eat differently, exercise consistently, meditate daily, read instead of scroll, save instead of spin. And they do, for a week, maybe 2, maybe an impressive 3. Before the motivation fades, the willpower is depleted by other demands, and the old habits reassert themselves with barely any effort at all. This is not weakness. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how behavioral change actually works. Willpower is a finite resource, depleted by use, unreliable under stress, and structurally unsuited for the long game. Habits, by definition, require almost no willpower at all because they're automated. The goal is not to be the kind of person who forces themselves to exercise every day through sheer determination. The goal is to be the kind of person for whom not exercising feels strange. The habit loop. Every habit operates through a 3-component cycle: a cue that triggers the behavior, a routine that is the behavior itself, and a reward that reinforces it. Understanding this structure is the foundation of deliberate habit installation. The cue is the starting gun. It can be a time of day, a physical location, a preceding behavior, an emotional state, or any other reliable signal. The routine is the automatic behavioral sequence that the cue triggers. The reward is the payoff. The reason the brain encoded this sequence is worth repeating. Understanding these 3 components gives you 3 different leverage points for both installing new habits and dismantling old ones. The minimum viable habit. The most common error in habit installation is starting too big. People decide to exercise for an hour when they're currently sedentary, meditate for 30 minutes when they've never sat still for 5, read for 2 hours when their current reading is essentially 0. These attempts fail not because of insufficient motivation. Usually the motivation is intense, at least initially, but because the habit hasn't been made small enough to survive inevitable resistance. Start smaller than you think you should. Embarrassingly smaller. Instead of exercising for an hour, do 5 push-ups. Instead of meditating for 30 minutes, take 3 conscious breaths. Instead of reading for 2 hours, read 1 page. The objective at this stage is not impressive output. The objective is reliable repetition, building the neural scaffolding of the habit through consistent execution regardless of scale. Once the habit is reliably automatic, scale it up through the principle of progressive overload. Gradual increases that continue challenging without overwhelming. Habit stacking. One of the most powerful techniques for new habit installation is attaching the new behavior to an existing one. Your existing habits are already deeply embedded in your neural wiring. They run automatically, reliably, with essentially no friction. When you anchor a new habit to an existing one, you borrow that automaticity as a launch pad. The formula: after I existing habit, I will new habit. After I pour my morning coffee, I will write 3 sentences in my journal. After I sit at my desk, I will review my top 3 priorities for the day. After I put on my running shoes, I will do my warm-up stretches. The existing habit becomes the cue for the new behavior, giving it a reliable trigger without requiring you to remember or decide. Identity level change. The most durable habits are those rooted not in what you want to achieve, but in who you believe you are. I'm trying to exercise more produces inconsistent behavior. I'm someone who takes care of their body produces different behavior, because it's an identity claim, and humans are powerfully motivated to act in accordance with their self-perception. Every time you perform a habit, you are casting a vote for a particular identity. Skip the workout. You vote for I'm someone who bails when it's inconvenient. Complete the workout even when you don't feel like it. You vote for I'm someone who shows up for themselves. Over time, these votes accumulate into a self-concept that becomes its own source of behavioral momentum. Ask yourself, who do I need to become to sustain the habits that would create the life I want? Then, begin performing the habits of that person. Before you fully feel like that person. Before the identity feels completely authentic. Act the part until it becomes the truth. The friction principle. Every behavior has a friction cost, the amount of effort, activation energy, and decision overhead required to initiate it. Bad habits tend to have very low friction. The cigarette is already in the pack. The social media app is already on the home screen. The fast food restaurant is conveniently on the way home. Good habits tend to have higher friction. The gym is across town. The healthy food requires preparation. The book is in another room while the TV remote is right there. The friction principle says, manipulate the friction landscape deliberately. Lower the friction on habits you want to build. Raise the friction on habits you want to break. This is environmental design applied at the granular behavioral level. Want to meditate in the morning? Place the meditation cushion in the middle of the floor where you physically have to step around it before your day begins. Want to stop checking your phone first thing in the morning? Put it in a drawer across the room the night before and replace it with a physical alarm clock. These interventions feel almost laughably simple, but their effects on behavior are substantial because they work with your biology rather than against it. The never miss twice rule. Perfectionism kills more good habits than any other single factor. The internal logic goes like this. I missed yesterday, so the streak is broken, so there's no point in doing it today either. So maybe the whole plan was unrealistic, so maybe I should just start fresh on Monday. And Monday becomes next month, and next month becomes never. The never miss twice. Rule breaks this chain at the critical junction. Missing once is a human event. Life happens. Circumstances intervene. You have a bad day. Missing twice is a decision. Protect the second day with everything you have, not because one day is neurologically significant, but because the story you tell yourself about missing twice versus missing once is entirely different. One miss is a blip. 2 misses is the beginning of a new pattern. Get back to the behavior immediately. Don't try to make up for the missed day with double effort. That path leads to overwhelm and another miss. Simply return to the normal practice as quickly as possible. The resilience of the habit is demonstrated not by never missing, but by the speed and ease of the return. Social architecture for habits. We are, to a degree that most people consistently underestimate, products of our social environment. The behaviors, norms, and expectations of the groups we belong to exert a continuous, largely invisible gravitational pull on our own behavior. We don't like to think of ourselves as this easily influenced. We prefer the narrative of the autonomous, self-determining individual. But the data is overwhelming. The people you spend the most time with have an enormous effect on your habits, your beliefs, and ultimately your life outcomes. This is not a reason for despair. It's a strategic variable you can deliberately manage. Spend more time with people who have the habits you're trying to build. Join communities organized around the behaviors you want to adopt. Find a training partner, a mastermind group, an accountability buddy, someone for whom you'll show up even on the days you wouldn't show up for yourself alone. The social dimension of habit formation is enormously powerful, and most people leave it entirely to chance. The Mindset Forge. Henry Ford reportedly said, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." It's one of those quotes so often repeated that it's become invisible, slid past without real engagement. But sit with it for a moment. Let it actually land. Your beliefs about what is possible for you, not what is theoretically possible for humans in general, but what is achievable for you specifically, determine the territory you navigate. A belief that a goal is impossible doesn't just make you feel pessimistic. It makes you blind to the pathways that lead to that goal, because the brain, operating on efficiency principles, stops processing paths it believes to be dead ends. Conversely, a genuine belief in possibility keeps your perceptual and cognitive systems actively scanning for the pathways, the resources, the connections, the information that could move you toward the goal. The belief literally changes what you see. This is the core insight of the Mindset Forge. Your mindset is not a passive reflection of reality. It is an active filter through which you perceive, interpret, and respond to reality. And like any filter, it determines what gets through and what gets blocked. The growth to mastery progression. Carol Dweck's research on growth versus fixed mindsets has become foundational in psychology, education, and organizational behavior. The core finding: people who believe their abilities can be developed through effort and learning, growth mindset, consistently outperform people who believe abilities are fixed traits you either have or don't, fixed mindset, especially when facing challenge and setback. But the growth mindset is a starting point, not a destination. The mastery mindset goes further. It doesn't just believe improvement is possible. It treats continuous improvement as a fundamental orientation toward all experience. Every encounter becomes material for refinement. Every failure becomes instruction. Every plateau becomes a signal to get more creative about the approach. At the mastery level, you're not trying to succeed. You're building a life dedicated to getting better, at thinking, at relating, at contributing, at being. Success becomes a natural byproduct rather than the primary objective. Evidence management. Your mind is constantly searching for evidence to confirm what it already believes. If you believe you're unlucky, you'll notice every setback and discount every success as an anomaly. If you believe you're capable, you'll notice your competencies and interpret setbacks as temporary and surmountable. The evidence is often the same. The filter is different. Mindset masters actively manage their evidence portfolios. They deliberately collect and revisit proof that their empowering beliefs are accurate. They don't do this dishonestly. They don't fabricate evidence that doesn't exist. But they ensure that the evidence which does exist in favor of their capability and possibility gets as much attention as the evidence that seems to argue against it. Most people, through negativity bias, are running heavily imbalanced evidence portfolios without realizing it. Stress testing. Your mindset. Empowering mindsets are easy to maintain in comfortable circumstances. They are genuinely tested only when things get hard, when failure is real and sustained, when the path forward is genuinely unclear, when people around you are expressing doubt, when your own track record seems to argue against optimism. Deliberately expose your mindsets to stress before the high-stakes moments arrive. Challenge your growth mindset with a project where failure is likely. Challenge your abundance mindset with financial pressure. Challenge your confidence mindset with public criticism. Observe what actually holds and what collapses under pressure. The gaps you find are your curriculum for the next phase of mindset development. The paradox integration. Advanced mindsets can hold apparent contradictions simultaneously without the tension becoming paralyzing. Confidence and humility, ambition and contentment, optimism and realism. Most people, when they encounter a mindset, apply it globally and absolutely. Be confident becomes never doubt yourself, which becomes brittleness in the face of genuine feedback. Mature mindsets are nuanced. They understand that the right orientation varies with context, that strength in one mode does not preclude appropriate flexibility in another, and that the most useful beliefs are those that can be held firmly as a general orientation while remaining permeable to the specific demands of specific situations. Mental energy architecture. You have been given every single day a fixed and non-renewable supply of mental energy. Unlike money, you cannot save it, invest it, or borrow against tomorrow's supply. When today's is gone, it's gone. And unlike most finite resources, most people spend theirs with essentially no strategy whatsoever. Mental energy, distinct from physical energy though related, is the cognitive resource that powers focus, decision-making, emotional regulation, creative problem-solving, and learning. When it's abundant, you think clearly, resist impulsive choices, maintain emotional steadiness, and do your best work. When it's depleted, you resort to cognitive shortcuts that frequently produce poor decisions. Your emotional regulation deteriorates, your creativity flatlines, and you default to comfortable, familiar behaviors, regardless of whether they serve your goals. Understanding this resource, how it's generated, how it's depleted, how it's restored, is foundational to operating at capacity consistently, rather than in sporadic bursts, followed by exhausted underperformance. Energy mapping. The first step is empirical. Track your mental energy across the day, across the week, across different types of activities and environments. Where are your genuine peak performance windows? What depletes you fastest? What restores you most effectively? Most people are operating on vague intuitions about their energy patterns when they could be operating on data. Most people have their highest cognitive energy in the hours immediately after waking, provided their sleep was adequate. This peak typically lasts 2 to 4 hours before declining meaningfully. There is often a secondary peak in the late afternoon for some people. Knowing your patterns allows you to schedule your most cognitively demanding work during your genuine peak times, a reallocation that produces more in less time, with less stress. Decision load reduction. Decision-making is one of the most energy-intensive cognitive activities. Every decision you make draws from the same reservoir that powers your creative thinking, emotional regulation, and sustained focus. Systems that eliminate unnecessary decisions, that automate routine choices through preset protocols, templates, and defaults. Preserve that reservoir for decisions that actually matter. This is why many consistently high-performing people wear essentially the same thing every day, eat largely the same things for breakfast, follow the same morning routine without variation. They've eliminated decision overhead in low-stakes areas to preserve mental energy for high-stakes ones. It's not rigidity. It's allocation. The restoration protocol. Mental energy is restored not just by sleep, though sleep is foundational and non-negotiable, but by specific types of activity during waking hours. Nature exposure, particularly, has robust research support for its attentional restoration effects. Gentle movement that doesn't demand concentrated effort. Social connection with people whose company feels genuinely easy and nourishing. Creative activities pursued for their own intrinsic pleasure, rather than any external output. What does not restore mental energy? Passive content consumption, social media, news, television watched without real engagement, activities that require effortful attention but produce no genuine engagement or satisfaction, and social situations that are socially demanding without being personally meaningful. Build deliberate restoration into your daily structure, not as a reward for having worked hard enough to deserve a break, but as a strategic practice for maintaining the energy quality that makes your work genuinely excellent. Cognitive performance. Optimization. Your brain has the capacity for processing, learning, and creative synthesis that would render the most powerful computer ever built obsolete in most domains that matter to human life. It is capable of holding simultaneously in working awareness multiple competing possibilities, integrating emotional and rational information, pattern recognizing across decades of accumulated experience, and generating novel solutions that have never previously existed. Most people use a small fraction of this capacity, not because they lack the raw material, but because they've never learned how to operate the system well. Cognitive performance optimization is about consistently closing the gap between your theoretical processing capacity and your actual performance, about creating the conditions under which your brain can operate closer to its genuine potential across the dimensions that matter most to you. Neuroplasticity as practice. The most important concept in modern neuroscience for anyone interested in self-development is neuroplasticity, the brain's demonstrated capacity to physically reorganize itself in response to experience, learning, and deliberate practice. You are not locked into the cognitive patterns you've developed up to this point. Your brain is actively, continuously remodeling itself, and you can deliberately influence the direction and nature of that remodeling. Every skill you practice with genuine engagement creates and strengthens neural pathways. Every behavior you repeat becomes more neurally efficient with repetition. Every challenging cognitive activity you engage in stimulates the growth of new neural connections. The brain you have today is not the brain you have to have tomorrow. It is the brain your history has produced. The brain you develop from this point forward is the brain your intentional practice will produce. Sleep as cognitive infrastructure. If you are consistently sleeping less than 7 to 8 hours, you are operating with a self-imposed cognitive impairment that affects virtually every dimension of mental performance: memory consolidation, emotional regulation, creative thinking, decision-making, processing speed, and sustained attention. Sleep is not dead time. It is when your brain performs the maintenance and consolidation operations that make everything else possible. During deep sleep, the glymphatic system clears metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking neural activity, including proteins associated with neurodegenerative disease. During REM sleep, the brain consolidates the day's learning and strengthens the emotional relevance of memories. You cannot negotiate with this biology. Sleep debt is real, cumulative, and not fully recoverable. Exercise as cognitive enhancement. Aerobic exercise is the most consistently supported behavioral intervention for cognitive performance across the research literature. Regular cardio exercise increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, which stimulates the growth of new neurons and supports the survival of existing ones. It improves executive function, working memory, and processing speed. It reduces the cortisol load that impairs cognitive performance under stress. It is, in terms of evidence base, the closest thing to a cognitive enhancement drug that doesn't require a prescription. 30 to 45 minutes of moderate aerobic exercise, 4 to 5 times per week, it produces cognitive benefits measurable enough to be visible on brain scans. If you are not exercising regularly, no supplement, brain training app, or neotropic will produce effects remotely comparable to simply starting to move your body consistently. The Learning Acceleration Stack. The way you approach new learning dramatically determines how well you retain and integrate what you learn. Passive exposure, reading through once, listening without active engagement, produces minimal retention. The learning acceleration stack combines the research-supported techniques of spaced repetition, active recall, interleaved practice, elaborative interrogation, and application in a systematic approach to any new domain. When you encounter new information you want to genuinely integrate, engage actively, ask questions, identify implications, note what surprises you, connect deliberately, relate explicitly to what you already know. Retrieve regularly, test yourself before reviewing, space strategically, distribute review over time. Apply immediately, use the information in a real context as soon as possible. The difference in learning efficiency and retention between this approach and passive review is not marginal, it's transformative. Integration and real-world application. You have now moved through 13 chapters of principle, framework, and technique. You've covered the mental prison and how to recognize it, the awareness revolution and how to initiate it, thought architecture, emotional sovereignty, reprogramming, focus, memory, decisions, resilience, habits, mindset, energy, and cognitive optimization. This is a comprehensive framework. In the right hands, it can genuinely change everything. But in the right hands is the crucial phrase. And those right hands are the ones that do the work of integration. Because here is the most important thing I can tell you at this stage. Knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is power. And the gap between knowing about these tools and actually using them in your real life, with your real challenges, under your real emotional conditions, is wider than most self-improvement content will ever honestly acknowledge. Most people consume self-development material the way they consume action movies. They feel energized during the experience, deeply engaged, even temporarily transformed. And then they walk out of the theater and back into their unchanged lives. The insight doesn't transfer. The inspiration doesn't persist. The knowing doesn't become doing. And nothing changes. This pattern has a name. It's called passive consumption. And it is the graveyard of potential. The one-at-a-time rule. The single most reliable way to guarantee you implement nothing is to try to implement everything simultaneously. You've just encountered 13 distinct areas of mental mastery, each containing multiple principles and techniques. If you leave this book feeling like you need to apply all of them starting Monday morning, you will apply none of them by Thursday. Select one. The one that addresses your most pressing, most concrete challenge right now. If you're losing weeks to distraction and scattered attention, focus mastery. If your emotional reactions are derailing your most important relationships, emotional sovereignty. If you're repeating patterns of self-sabotage you can identify, but can't seem to stop, the reprogramming protocol. If your life is driven by routine but the routine isn't serving you, the habit installation system. One tool. Real application. Consistent practice until it becomes genuinely internalized. Then add the next. Contextual translation. Abstract frameworks become powerful when they're made concrete to your specific life. Don't think about thought architecture as a general principle. Think about how you'll apply it specifically to the recurring pattern of anxiety that shows up every Sunday evening when you start thinking about the week ahead. Don't think about emotional sovereignty theoretically. Think about the 3 specific relationships where your emotional reactivity is costing you most, and design your practice around those exact situations. The more specific and contextual your application, the faster mastery develops. Generalities stay conceptual. Specifics become competencies. The measurement commitment. What doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. But more relevantly, what doesn't get measured doesn't get noticed. And what doesn't get noticed doesn't improve. Decide in advance what you'll track. How many minutes of uninterrupted focus can you sustain? How quickly do you recover from an emotional trigger before you can respond rather than react? How consistently are you executing your keystone habit? Track it. Review it weekly. Let the data inform your practice. The environmental design priority. All the internal resolution in the world is undermined by an environment that's arranged to produce the exact behaviors you're trying to change. Don't try to focus while your phone sits on your desk, buzzing. Don't try to build a reading habit without a physical environment where reading is the easiest available option. Don't try to maintain emotional sovereignty in relationships while surrounding yourself with people who consistently trigger your least functional emotional patterns. Design the environment before you test the will. It's not the only thing, but it's often the first thing. Patience as strategy. The most counterproductive thing you can do in mental mastery practice is to expect rapid, visible transformation and abandon the practice when it doesn't materialize quickly. Mental patterns that have been running for decades do not change in days. Neural pathways that have been deeply grooved by years of use do not rewire in weeks, but they do change. The research on neuroplasticity is unambiguous on this. The brain changes through deliberate, consistent practice over time. The changes accumulate below the threshold of daily awareness. You don't notice yourself changing day to day. And then suddenly you look back 6 months and realize that the pattern that used to run you effortlessly now requires your conscious attention to maintain. And the new pattern that used to feel forced is starting to feel natural. Trust the process. Not blindly measure, adjust, refine, but trust that consistent application of sound principles over sufficient time produces transformation that feels eventually not like achievement, but like identity. The teaching accelerator. One of the most reliably powerful techniques for deepening your own integration of any skill or body of knowledge is to teach it. Not someday, when you're an expert. Now, imperfectly, with whatever understanding you currently have. When you explain a concept to someone else, when you're required to translate it from your own internal processing into language clear enough for another person to understand, you discover with brutal efficiency exactly where your understanding is solid and where it's still vague. Every gap in your explanation reveals a gap in your comprehension. Every question the other person asks that you can't answer cleanly reveals a place where your mental model needs work. You don't need a formal audience or an official teaching role. Explain what you're learning to a friend over coffee. Start a conversation about focus with a colleague struggling with distraction. Write about what you're discovering, even if only in a private journal. The act of articulating forces clarification, and clarification is where real mastery lives. Cross-domain application. The most common failure mode in applying any new mental skill is single-domain thinking. People practice the technique in the specific context where they first encountered it and never think to transfer it elsewhere. You practice emotional regulation techniques during conflict at work, but never apply them to family relationships. You build the focus habit in your morning creative work, but never think to use it when reading or in difficult conversations. Mental mastery skills are not domain-specific. They're meta-skills that apply across the entire surface area of your life. Every context is a practice ground. Every relationship is an opportunity to apply emotional sovereignty. Every decision, from what to order at a restaurant to whether to change careers, is an opportunity to practice the decision-making framework. Every challenge in any domain is an opportunity to apply cognitive flexibility and meaning-making. The broader your application, the faster the skill generalizes into genuine capability. Seek out the transfer opportunities that narrow thinking will make you miss. The integration review ritual. Set aside 30 minutes each week, ideally the same time each week, to make it a reliable ritual rather than an intention, to review your mental mastery practice. Ask yourself, which tools am I applying consistently and which have I let slide? Where am I making visible progress and where am I still stuck in old patterns? What have I learned this week about how my mind actually works as opposed to how I thought it worked? What will I focus on in the coming week? This review ritual serves multiple functions simultaneously. It provides the accountability that prevents practice from silently dissolving into intention. It provides the reflection that converts raw experience into genuine learning. And it provides the forward planning that ensures you're working on your development deliberately rather than reactively. 20 years of weekly reviews is 1,000 conversations with yourself about how to think, feel, and choose better. That's a different kind of person than someone who consumed the same content and moved on. The mental master. You are not the same person who opened the first page of this book. I don't mean that sentimentally. I mean it as a statement of neurological fact. Every meaningful engagement with new ideas creates some degree of neural change. Every moment of genuine reflection, every time you paused and thought, that's true of me, or I do that, or what would happen if I actually tried this? Those moments were synapses firing in new patterns, new associations forming, the very substrate of your thinking shifting incrementally. You are not yet the mental master this book describes. Nobody is at the end of a single reading. But you are no longer the person who had no map. You now have a map. What you do with it from this point is entirely up to you. Let me describe the person the map leads toward. The mental master is not someone who has eliminated all negative thoughts, achieved perfect emotional equanimity, made only excellent decisions, and lives in a permanent state of peak cognitive performance. That person doesn't exist, and anyone selling you that person is selling you something that doesn't exist. The mental master is someone who has developed a fundamentally different relationship to their inner experience. Who can observe thoughts without being commanded by them? Who can feel emotions without being controlled by them? Who can identify limiting beliefs without being permanently bound by them? Who understands that their mind is not a fixed set of traits they were issued at birth, but a dynamic, plastic system that responds to how it's used and what it's trained on? The mental master has thought sovereignty, the capacity to observe thinking from a slight distance, to choose which thoughts to develop and which to release, to direct cognitive attention with something resembling genuine intention rather than reactive helplessness. The mental master has emotional intelligence, not the suppression of emotion, but the ability to read emotions as information, to regulate their intensity and duration, to choose responses rather than producing automatic reactions, to maintain functional stability under conditions that previously would have produced chaos. The mental master has decision excellence, a reliable process for navigating choices that serves their long-term interests rather than their immediate impulses, that draws on their genuine values rather than social pressure, that uses the best available information without waiting for a certainty that never arrives. The mental master has cognitive vitality, a mind that remains sharp, curious, and capable of growth regardless of age, circumstance, or past history, because it's been deliberately maintained and challenged rather than left to atrophy on comfort and routine. And perhaps most distinctively, the mental master has metacognitive awareness, the capacity to think about their own thinking, to notice when their mind is operating well, and when it's compromised. To understand the conditions under which they perform at their best and to actively create those conditions. To see the machinery of their own cognition clearly enough to maintain, repair, and improve it. This last capacity is the one that makes all the others sustainable. Without it, every tool in this book is a technique applied inconsistently. With it, mental mastery becomes a living, self-correcting, continuously evolving practice. Here is what I know about you. You are not here by accident. You picked up this book, or found your way to this content, because something in you recognized that the way you've been relating to your own mind is not the only way. Because some part of you suspected that the gap between who you are and who you're capable of being is not as fixed as it sometimes feels. Because you understand, at some level, that the mind you inhabit is the single most important territory you will ever occupy. And that territory deserves far more intentional cultivation than most people ever give it. That instinct was correct. Trust it. The world has never more needed people who think clearly in confusion, who remain steady in chaos, who see possibilities where others see only dead ends, who make decisions from values rather than fear, and who face the inevitable difficulties of a full human life, not as evidence that they're broken, but as the very material out of which a meaningful life gets built. That is the mental master. That is who this work points toward. The direction is set. The tools are in your hands. The territory ahead of you is your own mind, vast, complex, and more available to cultivation than you have yet imagined. A final word on the stakes. I want to be completely honest with you about why this matters beyond your personal life. We are living in a moment in history where the quality of collective human thinking has enormous consequences. For democracy, for the environment, for the technologies we build, and how we deploy them, for the way we treat each other across the lines of difference that seem to matter so much. The problems we face as a civilization require clearer thinking, better emotional regulation, wiser decision-making, and deeper resilience than our species has demonstrated so far at scale. Most of those problems will not be solved by any single brilliant mind working in isolation. They will be solved, or they will not be solved, by the collective quality of human thinking available to address them, by the ability of ordinary people, people like you and everyone you know, to think beyond their immediate emotional reactions, beyond their tribal loyalties, beyond the limiting stories they've inherited, towards something more accurate, more creative, and more genuinely useful. Mental mastery is not a luxury. It is not a self-indulgence or a productivity optimization strategy for people who want to earn more money or feel better about themselves, though it can certainly produce both of those outcomes. At its deepest level, mental mastery is a form of citizenship, a way of contributing something better than your default programming would produce. A decision to be a clearer, more deliberate, more capable version of yourself, not just for your own benefit, but for the benefit of everyone your life touches. Your children, if you have them, are watching how you handle frustration, setback, conflict, and uncertainty. They are learning from your modeling what a mind in action looks like. The quality of your mental mastery will shape theirs. Your colleagues, your friends, your community, they too are influenced subtly and continuously by the quality of thinking and being that you bring into your shared spaces. You cannot control this impact, but you can cultivate it. You can become the kind of person whose presence in a room, in a meeting, in a difficult conversation, in a moment of community crisis, raises the quality of the thinking available. Not through domination or superior intellect, but through the steadiness, clarity, and genuine capability of a trained mind. That is the aspiration this work points toward, not perfection, not some idealized state of enlightened invulnerability, but a life of genuine, continuing disciplined development, of a mind that is genuinely yours, genuinely directed, and genuinely in service of what matters most to you and to the world you're part of, the decision that contains all the others. Every journey begins with a single decision, not a resolution. Resolutions are made and broken by the millions every January. A real decision, the kind that changes the internal reference point, the kind where, once it's been made, the person who made it and the person who hadn't made it yet are genuinely different people. The decision is simple, though it's not easy, to take full responsibility for the quality of your inner life. Not partial responsibility. Not responsibility when it's convenient or when the circumstances make it easy. Full responsibility. The understanding that your thoughts are yours to direct, your emotions are yours to understand and navigate, your beliefs are yours to examine and update, and your mind, the most powerful instrument you will ever hold, is yours to master. Nothing outside you will make this decision for you. No book, no program, no teacher, no therapist, no partner, no medication, no spiritual practice will produce this decision as an output. It arises from within, or it doesn't arise at all. But here, at the end of this work, having moved through the full architecture of what mental mastery means and what it requires, the decision is closer than it's ever been. The gap between understanding and commitment is narrower than it was when you began. Cross it. The mental master you can become is not some distant, idealized future self. It's the person that consistent daily practice, applied with the tools you now possess, will grow into. It's already latent in you. The capacity was always there. What's been missing, perhaps, is the clear vision of what's possible, the specific framework of how to develop it, and the decision to begin. You have the vision now. You have the framework. All that remains is the decision. And every moment of every day, you make it again. Not once, every day. The choice to practice rather than coast, to respond rather than react, to question rather than accept, to build rather than drift, to own your mind rather than be owned by it. That daily decision, compounded over weeks and months and years, is how ordinary human beings become extraordinary ones. Not through luck or genius or some fortunate roll of the cosmic dice, but through the quiet, persistent, magnificent choice to become the most capable version of themselves, one day at a time. Choose mastery. Choose growth. Choose the full, directed, deliberate ownership of the most powerful thing you will ever possess. Begin today. Begin now. The mind that is waiting to be built is yours. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. Plutarch. The compound effect of habit ecosystems. Individual habits rarely operate in isolation. They cluster. They influence each other. They create cascading effects that ripple across your entire behavioral landscape in ways that are both positive and negative. Research on what are called keystone habits, foundational behaviors whose adoption tends to trigger positive changes across other seemingly unrelated areas, shows that certain habits function as linchpins for entire behavioral systems. Regular, vigorous exercise, for example, tends to improve sleep quality, which improves emotional regulation, which improves decision-making, which leads to better nutritional choices, which further improves energy and mood. The exercise didn't cause the nutritional change directly, but it initiated a cascade that eventually reached it. This means that when you're choosing which habit to install first, the wisest choice is often not the one that addresses the most obvious problem, but the one that will generate the most beneficial downstream effects. The habit that, once installed, makes several other desirable habits easier or more natural. Think about your current habits and their interconnections. Which single behavioral change, if made, would create the most positive ripple effects across the rest of your daily patterns? Start there. The habit installation system is ultimately not about grinding through behaviors you dislike until they become automatic. It's about deliberately designing a lifestyle, a complete pattern of daily living that naturally produces the outcomes you want, the growth you seek, and the person you're committed to becoming. When your habits are right, the life they build takes care of itself.